Hi everyone, welcome to my PsychBuster. Today I'm going to be looking at the claim that you can't die from lack of sleep. I think we've all heard some version of this before. Maybe you even heard someone say, "Oh, you'll be fine, just drink another coffee." Well, as college students, this myth comes up all the time during finals week. People pull all-nighters to finish assignments or study for exams, and it almost becomes a competition to see who can survive on the least amount of sleep. Because most people recover after one sleepless night, it's easy to assume that sleep deprivation isn't actually dangerous. But before we can answer that question, it's important to understand why sleep matters in the first place. Sleep isn't simply a period where the brain shuts off. It's actually an active biological process that helps restore both the brain and the body. During sleep, our brains strengthen memories, regulate hormones, and process information we've learned throughout the day. They also remove waste products that build up while we're awake. Our bodies also use sleep to regulate hormones, support the immune system, repair tissues, and allow the cardiovascular system to recover. Psychologists also distinguish between acute sleep deprivation, which is missing sleep for a short period, like pulling an all nighter, and chronic sleep deprivation, where someone consistently doesn't get enough sleep over weeks or months. While acute sleep deprivation mainly affects attention, reaction time, and memory, chronic sleep deprivation can have much more serious effects on both physical and mental health. So, is it true that you can't die from a lack of sleep? The answer is not exactly. One of the most famous examples is Randy Gardner, a high school student who stayed awake for 11 straight days in a supervised experiment. He survived, but by the end, he experienced hallucinations, memory problems, mood changes, and difficulty thinking clearly. This research has shown that chronic sleep deprivation affects much more than your brain. According to the American Heart Association, getting too little sleep is associated with an increased risk of blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and other serious health problems. During healthy sleep, your heart rate and blood pressure naturally decrease, giving your cardiovascular system time to recover. Without enough sleep, your body remains in a constant state of stress. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline stay elevated, blood pressure rises, inflammation increases, and your heart has to work harder over time. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist and researcher in sleep, explains that sleep affects nearly every organ system in the body, including the cardiovascular system. He argues that sleep isn't just important for feeling rested, it's essential for long-term physical health. So, what's the verdict? I'd say this claim is busted, mostly. It's true that pulling one all-nighter probably isn't going to kill you, but saying that you can't die from a lack of sleep ignores decades of scientific research showing that chronic sleep deprivation can seriously damage the body, especially the heart, and contribute to serious health problems that, if ignored, can have lasting consequences for your overall health and well being. The second claim we're going to focus on today is, why would I pay for therapy when I can just talk to my best friend? It's a pretty common belief, especially today with mental health being discussed more and more. And a lot of people believe that if you have a close friend who's willing to listen, then therapy isn't really necessary. When we're stressed about classes, relationships, family issues, or general anxiety, our first instinct is to usually text a friend or vent to someone we trust. Friends can absolutely make us feel better, but does that mean talking to a therapist is really no different than talking to a friend? To answer that question, we first need to understand what psychotherapy actually is. Psychotherapy, generally called therapy, is a structured form of treatment provided by licensed mental health professionals. Unlike a casual conversation, therapy uses techniques that have been tested through scientific research to help people understand their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. One of the most common forms is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT helps people recognize unhealthy patterns of thinking, like assuming the worst or constantly criticizing themselves, and teaches them strategies to challenge those thoughts and replace them with healthier, more realistic ones. On the other hand, there's something psychologists call social support. Social support is the emotional encouragement we receive from friends, family members, or people we trust. Having a strong support system is incredibly important because it helps reduce stress, provides comfort during difficult times, and reminds us that we're not alone. But social support isn't designed to diagnose or treat mental health disorders. One of the most influential studies on psychotherapy was conducted by psychologists Mary Lee Smith and Jean Glass in 1977. They analyzed hundreds of studies and found that people who received psychotherapy improved significantly more than people who didn't receive treatment. This was one of the first large meta-analyses to demonstrate that therapy is genuinely effective. Since then, decades of research have continued to support these findings. Studies have shown that psychotherapy is effective for treating conditions like depression, anxiety disorders, OCD, PTSD, and many other mental health conditions. That doesn't mean friends aren't valuable. They absolutely are. Friends provide a safe place to share what we're going through. In fact, having strong social support is associated with better mental and physical health. Therapists help in a different way. They spend years studying human behavior, psychological disorders, and evidence based treatments. They know how to recognize unhealthy thought patterns and then teach them coping skills, develop treatment plans, and adjust those plans based on their progress. Another important difference is objectivity. Friends care about us, but because they're emotionally involved, they might tell us what we want to hear or unintentionally reinforce unhealthy behaviors. Therapists are different. They're trained to challenge distorted thinking when necessary while still providing a supportive and non judgmental environment. So, what's the verdict? Is talking to a therapist just like talking to a friend? I'd say this myth is busted. Friends and therapists both play an important role, but they're not the same. Friends provide emotional support, companionship, and comfort, while therapists provide professional, evidence based research and treatment that has been developed through decades of psychological research. Learning about this myth reminded me that reaching out to friends is healthy and important, but sometimes emotional support alone isn't enough. Just like we wouldn't expect a friend to perform surgery or prescribe medication, we also shouldn't expect them to replace a trained mental health professional. While this myth is busted, it seems the healthiest approach is often having both a strong support system of friends and family, along with professional help when it's needed. Thank you.